The summons arrived without preamble, a stiff, formal envelope amidst Marcus's usual academic correspondence. He regarded it with a historian's detached curiosity. The heavy cream paper a stark contrast to the faded manuscripts and brittle maps that typically occupied his oak desk. For years, his existence had been a precise, ordered affair, a monastic devotion to forgotten eras within the quiet confines of his study. Human interaction was a variable he meticulously minimized, preferring the predictable narratives of the past to the messy improvisations of the present. The letter from a provincial legal firm he had never encountered informed him of an unexpected inheritance. Blackwood Manor. The name itself carried a faint, almost imperceptible resonance. A whisper from the periphery of local folklore he'd once cataloged as quaint superstition. An ancient, sprawling edifice on the remote coastline, notorious for its unbroken chain of unfortunate residents and persistent, baseless rumors of malediction. Marcus dismissed the notion with a quiet scoff. Such tales were the desperate attempts of unlettered minds to rationalize misfortune, not empirical truths. He spent the subsequent days preparing for the journey with the same methodical precision he applied to archaeological digs. His research into the manor's lineage was brief, confirming its age and the predictable string of eccentric, often tragic owners. No anomalies, nothing beyond the usual human failings compounded by isolation and time. The journey itself was a descent into increasing remoteness. Paved roads gave way to cracked asphalt, then to gravel, and finally to a narrow rutted track that wound through gnarled woodlands. The air grew cooler, carrying the saline tang of the sea, and the trees, contorted by relentless coastal winds, seemed to draw closer, their branches forming skeletal arches overhead. He passed a faded, weather-beaten sign pointing towards coastal caves, a geological curiosity he vaguely recalled from a regional survey, a series of ancient sea-carved hollows rumored to have housed smugglers and, more fancifully, prehistoric cults. The thought barely registered. His focus was on the manor. Its slate roof, mottled with lichen, sloped steeply, and its numerous chimneys stood like petrified sentinels against a sky that had bled from a pale blue to a bruised violet. An untamed wilderness of overgrown ivy wrestled with the stone walls, asserting its slow, green victory over human artifice. A rusted, wrought iron gate, half swallowed by thorny brambles, creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo the house's age. Marcus drove his sedan along a driveway choked with weeds, the tires crunching on loose gravel. He cut the engine. The sudden cessation of the car's hum left a ringing emptiness in his ears. He sat for a moment, observing the manor. It was immense, certainly, and undeniably decrepit, but he found no immediate evidence of anything beyond extreme neglect. The air, however, was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something subtly metallic and profoundly ancient, like rust mixed with forgotten dust. It clung to his nostrils, a persistent, unsettling perfume. He retrieved a heavy brass key from a small envelope provided by the solicitor, its weight surprisingly substantial in his palm. The front door, oak planks swollen with moisture and time, resisted his initial push. He leaned his shoulder into it, and with a protracted, grinding moan that grated on his teeth, it reluctantly yielded. The foyer was a cavern of gloom. Light struggled to penetrate the grime-coated leaded glass of the tall, narrow windows, casting only weak, fractured patterns on the dust-shrouded flagstones. It carried the same metallic, earthy scent, but here it was more concentrated, almost palpable. Marcus noted the peeling wallpaper, a faded tapestry of floral motifs, and the skeletal remains of what might have once been a grand chandelier, now draped in cobwebs like funereal lace. He moved slowly, his footsteps echoing with an unnerving resonance that seemed to bounce off unseen surfaces. He ran a gloved hand along a banister, thick with years of accumulated dust, and felt the gritty texture beneath the leather. His historian's mind cataloged the architectural details, the signs of successive eras of habitation and decay. But another, less rational part of him registered something else. A subtle, almost imperceptible pressure. A sense of being observed, not by a single pair of eyes, but by the very fabric of the structure itself. He attributed the feeling to the isolation, the sheer age of the place, perhaps a touch of fatigue from the long drive. His rational mind provided a steady, calming counter-narrative. Yet, as he stood in the suffocating quiet of the foyer, a prickle began to crawl up the nape of his neck. The house, he thought, did not merely feel old. It felt aware. He dismissed the thought immediately. A house was stone and timber, inert matter. It possessed no consciousness. The manor's heavy oak door closed behind Marcus with a sound like a tomb ceiling. The interior air was still and cool, carrying the faint, dry scent of aged paper and dormant dust. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean. He was a historian, accustomed to silence, but this was different. It felt less like an absence of sound, and more like a presence of something waiting. His first task was logistical: establish his research base. He had brought an extensive collection of documents, maps, and transcribed oral histories, all meticulously catalogued. The manor's library, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a towering fireplace, seemed the obvious choice. He spent the initial hours meticulously unpacking crates, arranging his materials on a long, heavy table that dominated the center of the room. The shelves were already packed with ancient leather-bound volumes, their titles obscured by dust and time. He made a mental note to examine them later, a historian's instinct to catalog everything. Marcus paused, rubbing his forearms. He walked towards it, extending a hand. No draft. The window was sealed tight. He attributed it to an anomaly in the old structure, perhaps a settling of the house or a peculiar thermal current. An old building, he reasoned, had its quirks. It was indistinct, like dry leaves rustling across stone, just beyond the threshold of comprehension. He stopped, holding his breath, listening. The sound did not repeat. He walked back into the library, scanning the empty space. Nothing. He was tired from the journey, and the manor's sheer scale was disorienting. He returned to organizing, his movements precise and deliberate. He had placed a small brass magnifying glass on the edge of his research table, next to a stack of local land deeds. When he reached for it again, it was gone. He frowned, scanning the table, then the floor. It was a distinctive object, not easily overlooked. He searched for several minutes, his irritation growing. Had he placed it elsewhere? Unlikely. He was methodical. He checked his pockets, then the other side of the room. He found it eventually, resting on a high shelf amongst a collection of forgotten astronomical instruments, a place he was certain he had not approached. He picked it up, a prickle of unease brushing against his rational mind. He must have been more distracted than he thought. Perhaps he'd unconsciously moved it while reaching for something else. The mind, he mused, often played such tricks in unfamiliar environments. Marcus decided to take a brief respite from his own research and examine the manor's existing collection. He ran a gloved hand along the spines of the antique books, dislodging plumes of fine dust. Most were obscure theological texts, forgotten poetry, or outdated scientific treatises. Then, tucked away behind a row of particularly thick, uninviting volumes, his fingers brushed against something different. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth, clasped shut with a tarnished brass buckle. He pulled it free, its weight surprising. The leather felt oddly warm beneath his fingertips, a stark contrast to the cool air of the room. He unclasped it carefully. The pages within were thick, cream-colored, filled with dense, looping script in faded black ink. The language was archaic, but decipherable. The first entry was dated over 2 centuries prior. It belonged to a previous owner, a woman identified only as the mistress. Her initial entries were mundane: observations on the weather, household affairs, and the planting of a new rose garden. But as Marcus turned the pages, a subtle shift occurred. Coastal caves. He dismissed the reference as poetic license, a literary flourish from a lonely woman. He continued reading. The entries grew more fragmented, the script less steady. The mistress detailed a creeping sense of disorientation, a blurring of her own memories. My own thoughts are no longer entirely my own. The house, it requires something. It hungers for understanding. The final entry was barely legible, a frantic scrawl. It takes. My mind unravels. The past is not gone. It is here. I am becoming part of the house. Do not listen to its promises. Do not delve too deep. It will consume you as it consumes all who seek its heart. The caves. They hold the key. Or the trap. Marcus closed the journal slowly, the brass buckle clicking shut with a definitive sound. The clinical detachment he usually maintained around historical documents wavered. This was not a mere historical account of a struggling mind. It felt like a warning, direct and personal, echoing across 2 centuries. The manor, he had rationalized, was just an old house. But the journal, clutched in his hand, suggested something far more insidious. The brass buckle of the journal gleamed dully in the lamp's glow. Its final click a sharp punctuation mark in the heavy silence. Marcus sat immobile, the brittle paper still warm beneath his fingertips. His usual scholarly objectivity, a shield against the emotional tumult of history, had been compromised. He pushed the journal aside, rising from the desk with a deliberate slowness meant to project control he no longer entirely possessed. The following days settled into an unsettling rhythm. Marcus retreated deeper into his research, driven by a need to contextualize, to rationalize the disturbing narrative he had encountered. He meticulously sifted through archived property records, local parish registers, and fragmented newspaper clippings, seeking any corroboration, any external detail that might explain away the journal's increasingly fantastical claims. He sought a forgotten illness, a local hysteria, anything but the implication of a sentient, malicious structure. It began subtly. Marcus would pause, pen hovering over parchment, listening. The sound would vanish, leaving only the creak of settling timber or the distant sigh of the wind. He dismissed it as the house's natural acoustics, an old building finding its voice in the quiet. He would whip his head around, but nothing. Only the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. His eyes, he reasoned, were playing tricks, tired from long hours poring over documents. Sleep offered no respite. He heard fragments of conversations, choked pleas, and laughter that grated like rusted metal. The clinical detachment was eroding, replaced by a persistent hum of unease. His research, however, yielded concrete, if profoundly unsettling results. The manor had a surprisingly high turnover of long-term residents. Beyond the family who had originally constructed it and his own distant lineage, a succession of unrelated individuals had purchased or leased the estate, each for a relatively short duration. He charted their fates. A respected local magistrate who, after 3 years of isolation, was found drowned in the estate's stagnant pond, officially ruled a suicide. A reclusive botanist who vanished without a trace after 5 years, leaving behind a meticulously cataloged but profoundly disturbed collection of specimens. Each ended in madness, disappearance, or death. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. The journal he had found was not an anomaly. It was merely the most articulate manifestation of a recurring tragedy. He left his research scattered across the desk and strode out, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The path wound down through overgrown thickets, eventually giving way to a narrow track that clung to the cliff face. Below, the churning slate-gray sea crashed against ancient rocks. He followed the path, a primal urge to escape the house's silent scrutiny propelling him forward, until he reached the entrance to the coastal caves. He stepped inside, the roar of the ocean amplifying and echoing around him. Water dripped from the unseen roof, each splash a distinct, unnerving sound. He moved deeper, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, revealing glistening, jagged rock formations. His light snagged on something embedded in the rock face, partially obscured by a slick layer of moss. He scraped it away, revealing a crudely carved inscription. The letters were weathered, almost illegible, but he made out a name. Elias Thorne, the botanist, and below it, a single etched word, consumed. The botanist hadn't just vanished. He had left a final desperate message in the stone itself, a warning. He emerged from the caves, the wind whipping his hair, the vastness of the sea offering little comfort. Marcus stood in the great hall, the weight of his discoveries pressing down on him. The historical pattern was undeniable. He looked around, no longer seeing merely an old house, a historical artifact to be dissected. He saw a predator, ancient and patient, its walls the very fabric of its being. The manor was not merely haunted, it was a hungry entity, and he, Marcus, was its latest inhabitant, its next meal. He felt a tremor, not of physical cold, but of something deeper, a disturbance in the calm waters of his intellect. Perhaps a return to the concrete, the measurable, would re-anchor him. He unfolded a large blueprint, tracing the lines of the manor's foundations, the thick stone walls. The lamp flickered once, casting a momentary, elongated shadow of his hand across the diagram. A scent, faint but distinct, drifted from the hallway. Old brine and something metallic, like rust or dried blood. He paused, inhaling, trying to place it. The sea was distant, certainly not close enough to permeate the thick walls of the central hall with such intensity. He dismissed it as an old house's peculiar exhalations, a mix of damp and decaying plaster. As he focused on the blueprint, a faint scratching began, seemingly from within the very walls of the study. It was irregular, persistent, like a small creature trapped, or a fingernail dragging across rough stone. He listened, head cocked. It would stop, then resume, always just beyond his immediate perception. He told himself it was the house settling, the old timbers contracting, but the sound felt too deliberate, too present. He closed his eyes for a moment, rubbing his temples. When he opened them, the study seemed subtly different. He shivered, pulling his cardigan tighter. Then, a vision. It was not a dream, for his eyes were open, fixed on the blueprint. The ink on the page began to bleed, the lines swirling into indistinct forms. The walls of the study around him seemed to ripple, the aged wallpaper blurring into patches of rough, wet rock. The scent of brine intensified, mixed now with the unmistakable tang of decay. He was no longer in the study. He stood in a cavern. The air was thick with spray and the guttural roar of unseen waves. Water dripped from the unseen ceiling, echoing. The light was dim, originating from a single flickering lantern held by an unseen hand. The sound of water, crashing and receding, filled his ears, punctuated by a low, mournful moan. He saw figures, indistinct at first, moving in the periphery of his vision. They were cloaked, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, carrying something heavy between them, something long and wrapped in coarse canvas. He felt it not as an observer, but as if it were his own. The figures paused at the crevice. One of them, taller than the rest, raised a hand. The lantern light caught a flash of something metallic. A blade, sharp and glinting. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable malevolence. Marcus felt a sharp, sudden pull, as if he were being dragged backward. The vision dissolved, the rough rock walls blurring back into the familiar wallpaper of the study. The sound of crashing waves diminished, replaced by the persistent scratching within the walls. He gasped, stumbling back into his chair, knocking over a stack of books. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The blueprint lay crumpled on the floor, its neat lines now irrevocably creased. He stared at his hands, which trembled uncontrollably. The scent of brine and metallic decay still clung to his clothes, his hair. He walked to the window, throwing it open, gulping down the cool night air. The sea was miles away. A distant hum, not the roaring beast he had just witnessed. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to dispel the lingering images, the crushing despair. This was not a nightmare. He had been awake. The details were too sharp, the sensations too real. The scratching in the walls intensified, moving, as if a presence was slithering just beneath the surface of the plaster. It felt like judgment, but also like hunger. He backed away from the wall, his gaze sweeping the room. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of dry leaves outside the window seemed imbued with a sinister intent. He was not alone. The house was not merely old, it was aware. And it was showing him things, not just as a historian, but as a participant, pulling him into its wretched past, making him feel the agony of its victims. The coastal caves. The memory was too vivid, too specific. It was a place, a real place, inextricably linked to the manor. He remembered the cryptic references in the journal, the allusions to offerings to the deep. His carefully constructed skepticism, his staunch belief in rational explanation, fractured. This was beyond reason. The house was not merely haunted. It was a living, malevolent entity, slowly, deliberately, consuming him. He was being watched, judged, and slowly, irrevocably, consumed. The journal lay closed, its weight of physical presence on Marcus's lap. The accounts within, detailing the slow unraveling of previous inhabitants, had not merely informed him. They had resonated, a discordant echo within his own skull. His usual academic detachment, a carefully cultivated barrier against the emotional debris of history, had been breached. He felt exposed, not to the past, but to a current, insidious truth he was only now beginning to perceive. Days blurred into a single, extended twilight within the manor's confines. Marcus found himself increasingly disinclined to venture beyond its heavy oak doors. The world outside, once a vibrant tapestry of research opportunities and intellectual pursuits, now seemed distant, muted. He would occasionally catch a glimpse of the churning gray sea from an upstairs window, its distant roar a faint, almost theoretical sound. He recalled his initial plans to explore the coastal caves, their basalt formations and echoing chambers promising geological intrigue. Now, the mere thought of navigating the winding path to the shore, of feeling the cold spray on his face, generated a peculiar lethargy, a resistance that felt less like physical exhaustion and more like an internal countercurrent. His attempts to maintain contact with the outside world grew sporadic, then ceased. His mobile phone, its battery indicator a steady green for a time, sat on the mantelpiece in the study, a silent sentinel. He had tried to call his university's archival department once to confirm a delivery of microfiche. The line had simply hummed with a flat, unwavering tone. Not a busy signal, nor a disconnected one, but an empty, expectant drone that spoke of nothing. He had sent an email to a colleague, detailing a minor historical discrepancy, but the message had bounced back hours later, an error report citing an undeliverable address. He hadn't tried again. The effort felt disproportionate to the outcome. The manor, in its vast, echoing silence, provided all the company he seemed to require. It settled around him like a heavy wool blanket, insulating him from the sharp edges of external reality. The creaks and groans of settling timbers, once unsettling, became a familiar rhythm, a low, constant murmur that spoke of the house's continued presence. He began to perceive these sounds not as structural decay, but as a form of communication, a deep, resonant breathing. His personal well-being began to recede from his priorities. Meals became an afterthought, often forgotten entirely, or replaced by a handful of dry biscuits consumed without conscious thought. His clothes, once neatly pressed, were now a rumpled testament to days spent hunched over ancient texts or wandering the manor's dim corridors. He noted these changes with the dispassionate curiosity of a scholar examining an artifact, not with alarm. The house, he realized, was not just a place he inhabited. It was a state of being. It was a gentle erosion, like water wearing down stone, leaving behind a smoother, more pliant surface. His determination, once a sharp, driving force, softened into a quiet resignation. He was no longer trying to solve the manor's mystery, but to understand its essence, to surrender to its peculiar enveloping logic. The line between observer and participant, once so clear, had blurred beyond recognition. His usual academic detachment, a carefully cultivated barrier, had thinned to a translucent film, barely containing the insidious whispers now coalescing in his periphery. He rose, the floorboards groaning in protest beneath his weight, or perhaps the house's. He needed air, a clear thought, something to anchor him to the present, to himself. He walked towards the study door, his intention to simply step into the corridor, but found himself pausing, his hand hovering over the cold brass knob. A flicker of an image, unbidden, bloomed in his mind. A woman's delicate hand, adorned with a single silver ring, resting on the same knob, her knuckles white. The memory was so vivid, the cool press of the metal against his skin so palpable that Marcus instinctively recoiled, his own fingers tingling with the phantom sensation. He shook his head, a small, violent motion, trying to dislodge the foreign imprint. This is not me. This is not my memory. He pushed the door open. The corridor stretched before him, familiar in its aged grandeur, yet subtly wrong. The tapestry depicting a hunting scene, usually hanging equidistant between two tall archways, now seemed to have shifted several feet to the left, crowding one archway more than the other. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. Optical illusion, perhaps, a trick of the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. But as he advanced, he noticed the intricate pattern on the Persian runner. A detail he had studied just yesterday was subtly altered. A particular crimson bloom, distinct in its symmetry, was now asymmetrical, its petals skewed. His rational mind struggled to reconcile the observation with his memory. The house was not merely old, it was mutable. He decided to go to his bedroom, to lie down, to impose order on his thoughts. He turned right at the grand staircase, a route he had traversed countless times. Yet, the narrow passage leading to the servants' wing, which he typically ignored, now seemed to beckon, illuminated by a faint, unnatural glow. He found himself drawn to it, his feet moving without conscious command. A thought surfaced, unbidden. Marcus must check the stores. The winter storms will be upon us soon. The provisions are dwindling. The thought was urgent, laced with a familiar anxiety, yet it was not his anxiety. He had no stores, no need for winter provisions beyond what he kept in the modern kitchen. He wasn't even sure what winter storms the thought referred to. It was late summer. He reached the end of the passage, expecting a small, utilitarian storage room. Instead, a heavy oak-paneled door stood before him, previously unseen, inscribed with an ornate, unfamiliar crest. This door was not here yesterday. He pulled. It opened with a sigh, revealing not a room, but a narrow, winding staircase descending into absolute blackness. A damp, earthy smell wafted up, mingled with the unmistakable tang of salt and something metallic like old coins. It was the scent of the coastal caves, a location he knew only from local legends and the distant sound of the surf, never from within the manor itself. How could this be? Come, my friend. The tides await. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to force the hallucination, the memory, the voice, away. When he opened them, the oak door was gone. In its place was the familiar, unadorned wall of the servants' passage, scarred with peeling wallpaper and faint water stains. The faint glow, the salty air, the earthy smell, all vanished. He pressed his palms against the wall, feeling the rough plaster, solid and unwavering. Had he imagined it? Was his mind already so fractured that he was hallucinating entire sections of the house? He turned, desperate to return to the study, to the closed journal, to some semblance of the reality he had known just moments ago. He pulled at it, his fingers fumbling with the thick fabric, but it was sewn shut, an impenetrable barrier. The house was not merely shifting, it was actively rearranging itself around him, a living labyrinth designed to disorient and trap. He was no longer merely a resident. He was a fly caught in a web, and the spider was the very structure that enclosed him. He was losing his footing, not on the uneven floorboards, but on the bedrock of his own mind. He was Marcus, wasn't he? A historian, a skeptic. But the names, the memories, the very architecture of his existence were all beginning to bleed into one another, indistinguishable from the ghosts of the manor's past. The scarred wall of the servants' passage solidified before Marcus, the oak door a phantom echo. He blinked, pressing a palm to the cool, rough plaster. The texture was undeniably real. Yet the image of the ornate door, the memory of its heavy wood and brass handle, lingered in his mind with an unsettling clarity, a vivid hallucination. His breath hitched, a shallow, ragged sound in the profound quiet. Was his mind betraying him? Or was this place actively fabricating, then dissolving, realities? He pushed off the wall, the scent of dust and damp stone clinging to his clothes. The manor was a labyrinth of shifting perceptions, a stage where his own sanity was the unfolding drama. He needed answers, something concrete to anchor him. The fleeting glimpses, the whispers, the disappearing doors, they were all threads in a tapestry he was desperate to unravel. His gaze fell upon a loose stone near the base of the wall, subtly out of alignment with its neighbors. It was a detail he'd overlooked countless times, dismissed as mere structural decay. Now it pulsed with a peculiar significance. He knelt, scraping his fingernails into the mortar, feeling a faint give. With a grunt, he wedged his fingers beneath it and pulled. He shone his lantern into the opening. The beam vanished into an inky blackness, revealing only a short, rough-hewn tunnel descending sharply. This was not part of the manor's known architecture, not even the forgotten blueprints he'd studied. This was something older, something concealed. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, he lowered himself into the tunnel. The descent was steep and slippery, his boots finding precarious purchase on the damp earth. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to hunch, his shoulders brushing against the rough rock. He could hear the faint rhythmic wash of water now, a distant murmur growing steadily louder. The air became heavy with the tang of brine and something else, a faint, sickly sweetness that reminded him vaguely of decaying vegetation. He was moving away from the manor's foundations, toward something beneath it, something connected to the coast. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast, echoing space. He stood at the precipice of a rocky ledge, overlooking a chamber carved by millennia of crashing waves. This was it, the coastal caves. The roar of the sea was immense here, amplified and distorted, a constant hungry sound. The air was frigid, misting his face with fine spray. The pathway led deeper, away from the immediate shore, into a section of the caves that felt less natural, more altered. Here, the walls were smoother, almost polished in places, bearing strange, shallow indentations. Not carvings, not symbols, but something more organic, like impressions left by immense, soft bodies. Then he saw them. Nestled in a deep alcove, protected from the direct spray, were dozens of objects. Not treasure, not artifacts, but personal effects. A tarnished silver locket, A child's wooden toy soldier worn smooth by countless hands. A delicate lace handkerchief still folded. A leather-bound diary, its pages swollen and warped. They were old, impossibly old, yet strangely preserved, as if time had forgotten them here. He picked up the locket. He opened it, revealing two faded daguerreotypes. A stern-faced woman, a gentle-eyed man. He opened the diary. The handwriting was elegant, looping, but the entries grew increasingly erratic, fragmented. The house, it hungers. My thoughts, slipping like sand. The faces, I can't recall my own name. Fading. The final entry was a scrawl, barely legible. It feeds on what makes us human. It takes everything. Marcus dropped the diary. This was a repository, not of physical objects, but of what they represented. The manor didn't just haunt, it consumed. The fading images in the locket, the lost words in the diary. They were not memories he was losing, but memories stolen from others, displayed as trophies. The sickly sweet smell returned, stronger now, almost cloying. It was the scent of decay, yes, but also of something else. Absorption, transformation. He looked around the cavern, at the countless personal effects, at the smooth, almost intestinal contours of the rock. It was not merely a house. It was a living, predatory entity, a parasitic organism rooted in this land, extending its tendrils through the stone and wood. It fed on the past, on identity, on sanity, growing stronger with each life it consumed. And he, Marcus, was its current preferred meal. He was trapped, deep beneath the earth, in the belly of the beast, and it had already begun to feed. The cool, rough plaster of the servant's passage wall pressed against Marcus's palm, undeniably solid. Yet the phantom echo of the ornate oak door, its heavy wood and brass handle, persisted behind his eyes. A cold certainty settled in his chest. This was not a fading memory. It was an active erasure. The house was not merely playing tricks. It was consuming, reorganizing, deleting. A surge of defiant clarity cut through the creeping disorientation. He was not mad. He was under attack. The entity that was this house sought to strip him of his perceptions, his knowledge, his very self, until he was nothing more than another brick in its shifting, malevolent structure. A visceral urge to resist, sharp and unyielding, pierced through the apathy that had begun to coat his mind. He would not be absorbed. He would not fade. His gaze swept the passage, a narrow, shadowed corridor that felt longer, colder than before. He needed to find a way out, a way to fight back, before the house devoured the last vestiges of his will. Marcus began to move, not aimlessly, but with a focused desperation. He moved through the manor's familiar yet subtly altered spaces. His mind raced, sifting through the fragments of local folklore, the cryptic entries in the caretaker's journals, the peculiar architectural anomalies he had observed. There had to be a point of origin, a mechanism, a weakness. A low hum vibrated through the flagstones, a sound less auditory and more tactile, a resonance within his bones. This was the house's foundation, its roots. Marcus activated the powerful beam of his headlamp. This was not part of the manor's structure, but something older, something the manor had merely annexed. The walls were uneven, glistening with condensation, and the air was frigid, biting. He scanned the cavernous space. Here, the house's influence felt different, less insidious, more primal. He moved along the perimeter, his boots crunching on loose gravel. His beam caught on a small, crudely carved alcove in the rock face. Within it, nestled on a narrow ledge, sat a single, tarnished brass locket. It was small, no larger than his thumb, and remarkably simple, unadorned by any jewels or intricate patterns. Marcus pried it open with a fingernail. Instead of a miniature portrait or a lock of hair, A single, tightly rolled scrap of parchment lay within. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfurled it. The paper was brittle, yellowed with age, and covered in a script he recognized as an archaic form of Latin, interwoven with symbols he did not. It detailed a ritual, a severing of the root, requiring a specific offering at a specific location, where the salt-kissed breath of the earth meets the endless hunger of the depths. A shiver traced its way down Marcus's spine. The description was unmistakable. The coastal caves. The parchment outlined a complex series of steps, involving not destruction, but a kind of ritualistic unbinding. It spoke of a lunar alignment, a blood offering, and the voice of the forgotten. It was not a simple act, but a terrifying, desperate gambit. The locket, the text explained, was a key, a focal point for the ritual, meant to draw the manor's essence to the designated site. Marcus clutched the locket, its cold metal now feeling like a burning coal in his palm. The glimmer of resistance had found its terrifying focus. The house still pressed in, but now he had a direction. He had a weapon. The coastal caves awaited. He pulled his hand from the wall, the plaster feeling unusually granular, almost coarse, as if it had aged decades in an instant. A faint, acrid scent, like damp earth mixed with decaying paper, permeated the air. He moved forward, his determination a rigid spine against the encroaching dread. He had to reach the study, to find the remaining journals, the obscured diagrams, anything that might explain the house's nature, its mechanism. The passage, usually dim, now felt like a tunnel of absolute black. Marcus fumbled for the lantern he carried, its beam cutting a wavering path ahead. He reached the heavy, unadorned door that led to the main hall, a door he had opened countless times. He twisted, it resisted, he pushed. The door remained immobile, as if mortared shut. A low, guttural thrum resonated from within the wood, vibrating through his fingertips. It was not a sound of wood settling, but of something immense holding its breath. He stepped back, his breath misting in the sudden drop in temperature. He heard a soft click from behind him. He spun, swinging the lantern. The passage wall where he had just been now displayed a freshly plastered seam, barely visible, but undeniably new. The entrance to the servants' passage had been sealed. The house was not merely resisting, it was actively reshaping itself, trapping him. Marcus ignored it, focusing on the immediate threat. He pounded on the door. No response, only the persistent low thrum. He tried another door, one leading to the old kitchens. As his hand neared the knob, the door slammed inward with a violent crash, then immediately swung back, locking itself with a resounding clack. A gust of frigid air swept past, carrying the unmistakable stench of something long dead, a metallic tang of old blood. He stumbled, catching himself on the opposite wall. His mind reeled, but his resolve solidified. This was not a haunting. It was a confrontation. The house was fighting back, trying to absorb him, to make him another silent echo in its walls. He remembered a half-erased note in one of the earliest journals, a frantic scrawl about the only way out and the sea's embrace. It was vague, but it was all he had. The coastal caves. He turned, the passage now a labyrinth of shifting perspectives. Walls seemed to ripple. The floorboards groaned underfoot as if protesting his very presence. He navigated by instinct, recalling the layout from his initial exploration, though the house seemed intent on distorting it. It did not move with a human gait, but seemed to flow towards him, silent and inexorable. Marcus raised the lantern, its light flickering weakly against the encroaching entity. A vision flared in his mind. His father's final, distant gaze, a moment of profound regret and unresolved conflict. The house was weaponizing his past, his vulnerabilities. No, Marcus rasped, his voice raw. He forced the vision away, focusing on the immediate physical threat. The spectral figure reached out, its elongated fingers stretching towards him. He wrenched his arm away, stumbling back. He found himself in a part of the house he vaguely recognized as the old laundry room, now choked with cobwebs and the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery. A small, reinforced door, usually locked, stood ajar. It led to the exterior, a seldom-used service exit that descended towards the cliffs. The house had inadvertently, or perhaps deliberately, presented him with an escape route, a cruel taunt. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with impending storm. He scrambled down the narrow, overgrown path that snaked precariously down the cliff face. He could feel its gaze, a pressure on his back, a silent scream of fury at his defiance. The path twisted and turned, eroding in places, treacherous in the failing light. He could hear the roar of the ocean below, a constant primal sound. He slid on loose scree, catching himself on gnarled roots. He smelled ozone, the sharp scent of impending rain. Finally, the path opened onto a narrow, rocky beach, littered with smoothed stones and tangled seaweed. The tide was coming in, the waves crashing closer to the entrance. He stepped onto the wet sand, the sound of the surf a deafening roar, a desperate counterpoint to the house's silent, suffocating malice. The very structure sought to consume not just his past, but his present, the moments of his existence. He had felt it before, a creeping fog at the edges of his mind, but never with such deliberate, almost surgical precision. He clutched the heavy, ornate iron key in his other hand, its cold metal biting into his skin. His research, his frantic, desperate late-night dives into ledgers and architectural drawings, had pointed to a single terrifying truth. The house, in its true form, was not merely the stone and timber above ground. Its roots ran deeper, into the earth, into something ancient and predatory. Marcus moved, not with haste, but with a deliberate, measured stride. The air grew perceptibly colder, the silence around him deepening to an almost painful pressure. The servants' passage, narrow and unadorned, seemed to stretch indefinitely, its rough-hewn walls absorbing any sound he made. No creaking floorboards, no distant groan of timbers. Only the faint, rhythmic drip of water, unseen yet increasingly audible, suggesting a descent, a connection to something subterranean. His breath plumed in the frigid air. The house was trying to deter him, he knew. The passage abruptly angled downwards, the rough plaster giving way to exposed, damp stone. The rhythmic drip intensified, echoing off unseen surfaces. He reached an irregular opening, a jagged maw in the stone. Beyond it, the faint, roaring breath of the ocean. He had found it. The passage led directly into the coastal caves. The transition was immediate and profound. The air was heavy, tasting of salt and decay, and the constant deep rumble of the waves crashing against unseen rock filled the space, a primal heartbeat. Marcus stepped onto damp, uneven rock. The floor sloped downwards, slick with algae and spray. He swept his torch beam across the cavern, revealing colossal, ancient formations. Stalactites like frozen tears, stalagmites like teeth erupting from the earth. But it was not the natural grandeur that arrested him. In the deepest recess of the largest cave, where the roar of the ocean was a deafening symphony, stood a structure. It was not carved, not built, but grown. A massive, petrified growth, a grotesque amalgamation of rock, and something that resembled gnarled, twisted roots, rising from a central, obsidian-black pool. The water in the pool was utterly still, reflecting nothing, absorbing all light. It seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, a low, resonant thrumming that vibrated through the rock beneath his feet and into his very chest. This was the core, the heart of the house. A sudden, overwhelming torrent of images slammed into his mind. Not his own memories, but fragments, shards of countless lives. It was a conscious, ancient entity, feeding, growing, its hunger insatiable. Panic threatened to choke him. He felt his own memories begin to fray at the edges, his childhood home, the face of his mentor, the details of his research, all dissolving into the chaotic surge of stolen lives. His determination wavered, almost broken by the sheer, crushing weight of accumulated existence. But he fought back. He had anticipated this. He had learned the method, deciphered the ritual not of appeasement, but of disruption. It involved a specific frequency, a precise resonance. He raised the key, holding it aloft. Its ornate head, a series of interwoven symbols he had initially dismissed as decorative, began to glow with a faint internal light, a deep, resonant blue. The thrumming from the obsidian pool intensified, shifting in pitch, becoming a piercing whine that grated on his teeth. The air grew impossibly heavy, pressing down on him, trying to force him to his knees. He focused, pushing through the mental assault, through the pain in his ears, through the burning sensation behind his eyes. He had to enact the sequence. The house was fighting, thrashing, trying to shake him loose, to consume him before he could complete his desperate gamble. The swirling memories intensified, becoming a physical force, tearing at the fabric of his perception. He saw his own face, distorted, melting into 100 other faces. His name, Marcus, became a meaningless sound, lost in the roar of the ocean and the shriek of the house's core. With a guttural cry, he plunged the glowing key towards the obsidian surface of the pool, aiming for the precise center of its terrible, black stillness. The moment the tip of the key broke the surface, the cavern erupted. The house was not merely absorbing the past, it was actively subtracting the present. His thoughts, once sharp and delineated, began to fray at the edges, mingling with snippets of unfamiliar recollections. A faint scent of pipe tobacco, a child's distant laughter, the metallic tang of an antique locket. None were his, yet they began to feel intimately familiar, as if they had always been part of him. Panic, cold and clinical, gripped him. He was becoming porous, his identity dissolving into the house's vast composite memory. His mind, still functioning with a desperate analytical clarity, sifted through forgotten texts, fragmented legends. It was a desperate gamble, a threadbare hope, but it was all he had left. He moved, driven by an instinct beyond rational thought, through the deepening gloom of the manor's forgotten corridors. Stay, rest, we are all here. He pushed past them, searching for the telltale signs, the subtle shifts in masonry, the concealed hinge. Finally, behind a tapestry depicting a faded hunting scene, he found it. A narrow, almost invisible seam in the stone. With a grunt of effort, he forced it open. The passage was not man-made in its entirety. Rough-hewn stone gave way to natural rock, slick with moisture. The passage opened abruptly, not into open air, but into a vast, echoing chamber. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from unseen sources, illuminating patches of wet, glistening rock. He was in the coastal caves. This was not an escape. The house was here too. He felt its presence, not as stone and timber, but as a vast, ancient consciousness permeating the very rock. His eyes adjusted, and he saw it. A central fissure in the cavern floor, from which the faint light seemed to pulse. It wasn't water, but a viscous, semi-translucent substance, glowing with an internal, sickly luminescence. From this primal pool, thick rope-like tendrils of what appeared to be petrified roots extended, weaving themselves into the cavern walls, climbing upwards, disappearing into fissures that must lead back to the manor above. This was the source, the core. The true nature of its feeding became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just consuming memories, it was integrating them, weaving them into its own fabric, making them part of its vast, enduring consciousness. Marcus wasn't being erased into oblivion. He was being absorbed into something monstrously eternal. He would persist, not as himself, but as a component, another echo in its endless, hungry mind. He could not escape, but perhaps he could wound it. He focused with every fiber of his being on a single defiant thought. I am Marcus. I am not this house. He pushed against the encroaching tide of alien recollections, asserting his own identity with a desperate primal scream that remained trapped in his mind, unheard. He projected a memory, not of fear, but of pure, unadulterated intellectual contempt for its parasitic nature. A historian's disdain for a corrupted archive. A shudder ran through the caves. The phosphorescent glow flickered erratically, and a low, guttural groan resonated from the depths of the fissure, a sound of ancient pain. The tendrils quivered, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of the house's collective consciousness seemed to recede, leaving him breathless but intact. He had inflicted a wound, a conceptual blow against its seamless integration. But the victory was fleeting. As the light stabilized, a new sensation settled over him. His own thoughts, though still distinct, now carried a faint, resonant hum, an echo of the caves, of the house. He felt the vastness of its memory, not as an external force, but as an internal landscape, a new, horrifying dimension of his own mind. He was still Marcus, but Marcus plus. The cold water of the coastal caves lapped at his feet, and he knew he would never leave.